online. Fantastic. So Peace News has been going since 1936. So we're about to mark our 88th birthday. And it was set up by a journalist who was frustrated that the magazines that the Peace News was producing were very much about peace people talking to each other. And he wanted to produce something that you could sell on the street, you could pass to a workmate, and they would be able to get into it. It'd be accessible, as we'd say now. And so that's how it started out. I welcome everyone here, folk who are long-time Peace News subscribers or readers, people who have never heard of us before and are only now seeing this logo that is flashing behind me. So I welcome everybody tonight. And tonight we're having a conversation with our longest serving columnist, Penny Stone. And I suspect, Penny, that you may not just be the longest running columnist currently running. You may be the longest running columnist ever. That's my guess. I don't know for sure, but I wouldn't be surprised if that was the case. So I have been editing Peace News since 2007. And in March 2015, I got an email from Penny saying that Chris Booth, a former co-editor of Peace News, had suggested she get in touch. And that's how this wonderful column was born. So we'll get on to that in a minute. So me and Penny will have a little bit of a conversation, and then there'll be questions from all of you. But before we start hearing from Penny about how she came to where she is now, given the horrific nature of the moment that we're in, I just thought, I said to Penny beforehand, maybe we'd start with just giving you a moment to respond to where we're at in terms of Gaza. So Penny, I'm gonna hand to you for whatever you want to say on that.
Thanks, Mil. Yeah, when Mil said, let's have a moment to acknowledge what's happening before we get into the conversation, I was just like, what can we possibly say about Gaza? It's just so awful and painful. And he said, well, that's probably just the thing to say then. And as the conversation goes on, I'm sure we'll touch upon my connection with Palestine and the Palestinian cause, and I think just to connect with it for a moment before we start, I think for me it's just it always comes down to the humans and just the pain of it, and I'm sure that's the case for all of you here today, that it just it feels too much and it feels overwhelming, and the things that we do, that I write about every other month about us singing together, and the doing that the singing bumps into and helps to keep the momentum going, that's where the hopeful bit lies, because the size of it, whether it's Gaza or whether it's the climate crisis, whether it's these really huge things that we're all tussling with in this moment, that it's the coming together bits like this, even though it's virtual, this moment of us being together, and I can see some of your faces on the screens, and it's it brings a sense of, okay, it's not just me, I'm not just feeling this, I'm not just feeling what can we do that actually we all get out there together, and singing such a huge part of that for me, as it is, I'm sure, for many of you. Yeah,
thank you very much for that, Penny. So if we go back to the beginning, could we hear a little bit about like where you come from, how you were raised and so on?
because I'm in a singing gear in my head, Mel. You keep saying the beginnings of sentences and I keep finishing them with songs. You said tonight and my brain went, I'm gonna have myself such a good time. I'll try and not do that to to multiple things. Yes, I grew up in the Midlands in Derbyshire, and my mum was a pacifist and a socially engaged human and a feminist. And she, when I was younger, she from the age of 6, she started taking me and my brother to visit the Iona community every summer or every other year for a week, which at the time was very involved in supporting anti-apartheid stuff and, you know, and the broad spectrum of social and environmental justice. And so that fed in, I think, very early, both to my sense of sort of a community that can build challenging ethical questions, and you know, I became a militant boycotter of Nestle when I was about 8 or 9, and I wouldn't have it in the house. I'm terrible. My poor dad was a huge fan of condensed milk, and at the time only Nestle made condensed milk, and I would find it in the house and throw it out. Terrible power play from a child, but it ground that time and those experiences with largely the adults in those communities during those weeks of community, sowed in me, I think, a sense of the way in which ethical and socially conscious living can be built quite quickly amongst a group of relative strangers. And at that same time, the singing was very vibrant in that place, and it was very informed by a lot of the Southern African particularly, but from other African countries as well. This sort of rich 3 and 4 part a cappella harmony, which was partly to do with how connected with the anti-apartheid movement it was, and also just to do with church connections, with people coming back and forth to different church communities across the continent of Africa, problematic as some of that is. But that music embedded in me. As I reflect back, I grew up in England and I used to cry the whole way across Mull. If any of you have been to Iona, I used to cry under a blanket in the back of the car. Once we went in the car, we used to go on the train originally. But I would cry all the way across Mull because I was just so, my heart just hurt so much to leave that community, I think, retrospectively. But I brought back the music with me, and it was particularly the African stuff. And then a lot of the other music was some of the best Scottish folk tunes that had just been nicked and rewritten to often social justice lyrics. And so in later life, I rediscovered a lot of those songs and was like, oh, that song, oh, that's actually Dream Angus, or oh, that's actually, you know, and I, those two bodies of music, the particularly Southern African, as I say, but other sort of big African a cappella music and the traditional tunes of Scotland and Ireland, inform a huge part of my musical vernacular now. And even though what I was brought up in was really a classical music environment, my granny was a piano teacher, had to stop teaching piano because she married, and at that time you weren't allowed to keep working for her. And so that was a big part of my musical life as well. So it's sort of it was always intertwined, I think, is what I'm trying to get to. This sense of community, this sense of socially engaged being in the world, and the music that supports that and that makes you feel that in a completely different way. I think those seeds were sown way back then and have carried on for me, thankfully.
So I don't think it's a exaggeration to say music is your life now. And so maybe you could tell us a little bit more about the bridge between those early experiences and how you traveled along. I was going to say a bridge of song, but maybe that's not the right thing to say. But anyway, please tell us more about the evolution of that and how you moved towards where you are now.
There must be a song that's called Bridge of Song, mustn't there? Answers in the chat, people. Yeah, so I knew I wanted to do music as a teenager. I didn't know what I wanted to do with it. I always had a teaching thread in me. I used to, if I could do something, or if I could almost do something, I was very quick to support and help other people to do that. You know, I had the explaining bit. One of my friends at school used to call me Yogi, as in Yogi Bear. And it wasn't until we left school I said to her, you know, why do you call me Yogi? It just never thought to ask. And she said, oh, it's because you helped me. You helped me in science. I was like, oh, you know, I'd never really thought about that, but it's really lovely. So I, you know, obviously that's part of how I am as a human. So I wanted to do music, and I just wanted to explore music. I ended up doing a classical music degree because I love classical music, but which was great. But I focused on sort of music, ethnomusicology and composition stuff.
And where was that? And where was
Liverpool.
that?
Liverpool. I've been creeping north. I might end up in the Highlands yet. And yeah, that was great. But I went on to start teaching after I finished uni. But I had a real a dissonance with the classical teaching style, in this sense of like teaching someone how to do something from the outside. Whilst there's loads of really valuable, brilliant stuff about it, it didn't resonate completely with me. There was something that didn't quite work for me. And when I moved to Edinburgh after that, I somebody suggested I have a cup of tea with Jane Schonveld, who at the time was a natural voice singing teacher in Edinburgh, and we had a cup of tea, and she said, oh, you just need to go, you know, need to go and see Frankie Armstrong. And so I went and did a week's course with Frankie Armstrong. I was like, oh, this is how I experience singing, which is all about freeing the voice from inside, and about removing layers rather than adding layers, I suppose, for in how we help people to find their voices. And a lot of it still is a cappella, is teaching by ear, is connecting with the folk musics of the world, with the way in which we all as human beings experience music and movement, is that we all move intuitively, we all make sound intuitively long before we know how to walk in a straight line or speak words. And it's, you know, it's this very intuitive thing that, particularly in the West, we have a very a structural block to it, or lots of us experience lots of no's, like don't do that, on the way to using our voice, which isn't just about singing. It's also about how we engage in our communities. It's about how we are able to fully express our human selves. So that was amazing. I was like, oh, brilliant, these are my people. Joined the network, started teaching in that way, you know, developed my skills, which lots of which were already there and just needed uncovering a little bit. And I've carried on connecting with and working with that network, which is very close to my heart. Is a huge growing network of practitioners who strive to do the same thing as I do, which is just to clear the way for people to make sound and make noise and be themselves in a shared space, and who love harmony. Which does that, you know, harmony is one of these great metaphors, which is that if everybody was singing the same note, it'd just be one note. So, you know, we have to be expressing ourselves differently. We have to be singing different notes for this incredible harmonic experience to happen, both for singers and for people listening. And I love that metaphor as well. I think it goes so far to say, you know, that the world is richer with you in it, with you as your authentic self in it, which is often what we're trying to do as activists. It's trying to make the space for everybody to be able to be who they are in safety, in whatever environment they're living in, whether that's our next door neighbours or whether that's people living in Gaza or Israel even. So yeah, I don't know if that answered the question. I feel like I might have taken the meandering path there, Mill.
It definitely answered the question. So which does bring us on to, I hesitate whether to say protest in harmony or protest in harmony. I'm not totally sure. But anyway, so you're a song leader of this amazing radical choir in Edinburgh. Would you like to tell us a little bit about how that came about and your role and so on?
Yeah, so I moved from Liverpool, I moved to Edinburgh, and I had been planning to get a radical choir going in Liverpool. There actually is one now, but there wasn't at the time when I was living there. And that had been part of my plan. And then when I moved to Edinburgh, there was this pre-existing group called what I call Protest in Harmony. We'll have to do a democratic spread and see how other people call it, but I call it Protest in Harmony. And so I went along, and I moved to Edinburgh with my best friend. After we finished uni, we decided we better just live together for a year just to check that we were going to be, okay as adults together. We decided that we would be, and she went off back south again. Terrible choices, but there we go. And the two of us went to, it was Fastlane 365 then, which was this incredible, it was 2007, in fact, the year that you started editing Peace News. And it was an incredible year-long set of blockades and actions outside of Fastlane, the nuclear base in the west of Scotland. And there were different groups every day, nearly every day, doing something, blockading and mostly blockading and demonstrating and dancing and having, mini Olympics and all manner of things that you couldn't even dream of. And there was singing blockades, and so there was a something. It was one of Janet Fenton's Bin the Bomb somethings that was at the Pleasance for those people in Edinburgh, that was at the Pleasance in Edinburgh. And I went along because it was not because Protest and Harmony were singing, but because I wanted to get involved in the Fastlane 365 stuff. And my mum had taken me to Fastlane when I was 15. We were headed probably to Iona. We were headed north, and she took me to Helensburgh and along to Fastlane, and she stopped the car and she just said, I need you to see this thing that exists. And she told me about it, and then we went on holiday. And it was I've such a strong, clear memory of it, not just because of for those of you that haven't been there, the barbed wire and it wouldn't have been as barbed wiry quite as it is these days, but it wasn't just the size of it. The imprint I have is the emotion of my mum, telling me about it whilst we were sitting there looking at it, and her sense of, just how horrendous it was that we had this thing and that we supported this thing and that we were paying for this thing. And so obviously a seed was sown there. So because the 365 stuff was happening, I'd been in my early 20s then. I went to the Bin the Bomb bash.
So for the non-British folk who might see this, do you want to just say what Fastlane is? What your mum would have told you?
Thank you. Yeah, so Fastlane is where we keep the nuclear submarines, the UK's nuclear deterrent system, as they will inauthentically call it, and it's a naval base on the west. It's quite close to Glasgow, which is the biggest, most populated city in Scotland, and it's in a beautiful bit just to the west of Loch Lomond that you'll have heard about, singing beautiful poetic Scottish countryside songs. And it is incredibly beautiful, bit of the countryside, and it's where we keep the nuclear weapons, and it's where there have been protests for many years since the 1960s. The nuclear subs went to the Holy Loch, which is nearby, also on the west coast, and so there were demonstrations there, and there was always singing at those demonstrations. So in the 1960s, there was the Glasgow Folk Singers Guild, effectively headed up singing, and there would be ferries of protesters going with singers singing, "Oh, you canny spend a dollar when you're deed. Oh, you canny spend a dollar when you're deed. Singing ding dong dollar, everybody holler. Oh, you canny spend a dollar when you're deed." And other songs that I'm sure some people are singing along with. And in fact, there was a record of them put out, the Anti-Polaris. What was it called? It was a Folkways record. Anti-Polaris something, which was the name of the first nuclear weapons. I'll get distracted talking about the history of Scottish anti-nuclear song. I'm going to reset myself. So as part of the 365 campaign, to shut down that base as much as possible over a year, There were things happening all over Scotland, all over the UK. And oh, nice one, Gabe. I thought you might find it. That's a link. You can listen to those songs. They're fantastic. And in the chat, sorry, the link's in the chat there for anybody wanting to look it up later. And Protest and Harmony was singing. And I said to my best pal, Lucy, we were lurking at the back with our pints. I said, those are my people. I'm going to stay in Edinburgh. And she said, yeah, I know you are. And I went and said hello. And I found out when the rehearsal was. There was, as there is still now, there was a monthly rehearsal. And I went along. And then I offered to teach a song at the next rehearsal to the two song leaders at the time, which I think must have been Jane Lewis and Shireen Benjamin, who the three of us are co-leaders of the group now. And I think they were both. Jane was certainly leading. I think Shireen must have been as well. And we went across to Fastlane, and I got involved in organising the singers' blockades, and it was, great fun. We had these huge banners. We've got one saying "Staying Alive" with a 1970s, with proper dancing movement, and we've got one with a huge hand, and I don't know if anyone has this in their attic, dig it out, because I've not seen it for years, but it says "Stop in the Name of Love," and I just love it. So we had a sort of song themed blockade, and in fact that was my first arrest. Was at, I think, must have been the singers' blockade at Fastlane in 2007. Which was an important and beautiful moment. And we carried on singing long into the small hours. I'm sure the police were very delighted to be serenaded all through the night. I won't serenade.
So that's how you became involved in the group, and you've been involved ever since.
Certainly have. Yes, I didn't realise how long it had been. We just had our 20th birthday, Protest and Harmony, and I realised I hadn't realised I'd been around for most of that time. I think of myself as coming in later, which I did, but it was actually only a few years later. Yeah, they're a great bunch.
Terrific. So you mentioned earlier, and I wanted to ask about the fact that you've been to Palestine, and I wondered if you just wanted to share a bit about what led you there, your experience and your involvement in the cause since.
Yeah, I was volunteering, with about, as often some of us have in our lives, with about 80% of my life. I was volunteering at the Peace and Justice Centre in Edinburgh, early on in my days in Edinburgh. And I was given the opportunity, actually it was the Iona community again, I was given the opportunity to go to the West Bank on the Sabeel conference, which is the Liberation Theology organisation, I suppose, based in Palestine, which is liberation theology evolved in Latin America in the 70s and 80s, and has gone on to inform other liberation movements for those people who have a Christian connection. I suppose I'm agnostic. I wouldn't quite go so far as to say I'm atheist. I grew up Catholic, which had its own influences, good and bad. But it's interesting that the Iona community has had such a strong and important thread in my life, and a lot of my friends in the peace movement have connections, ongoing connections with the community, which is lovely. And they had two places for young people, sort of under 25, to go on this tour around the West Bank. It was called a conference. It was 2 weeks, and it was traveling all around the West Bank. It wasn't that long after the Second Intifada, so it was still physically recovering. There were a lot of I was going to say a lot of rebuilding happening. The rebuilding wasn't happening. There was a lot of visual structural damage, a lot of bullet holes in in the, you know, the university walls, and a lot of people who had, you know, recently lost limbs, and all of the present trauma that is present in that. And it was during a week when the owner, which I hadn't had a connection with the owner community for a few years, but they had their residential young people thing on the island. So none of their young people who were actually actively involved with the community were available. And somebody, I can't even remember who, somebody suggested that they, it might have been Jan Such Pickard, suggested that they send me. And so I got a phone call saying, do you want to go to Palestine for 2 weeks? And I said, absolutely. And my mum said, oh, and completely understood why I wanted to go and supported it. But, you know, I think found it a little bit anxiety inducing. And it completely floored me.
And how had you come to the point where you were a person who would just say yes straight away? Like what had led up to that point that you were in that position in relation to Palestine?
I wasn't that knowledgeable about Palestine at the time. I was involved in the piecework I was involved with. It was based in Scotland with an internationalist. You know, we don't. Those of us that have been very involved in opposing nuclear weapons, we don't just do that because if something goes wrong, something will happen to us. We do it because, you know, we have this sort of all expansive sense of human life. So I was in that place, but my activism had been focused in wherever I was living at this in my life. And why I was so quick to say yes. I mean, it felt like an opportunity to meet different people. I have traveled. I've been very lucky to travel in my life, and I think part of it for me, part of the yes for me was a sense of getting to meet people that I'd only heard about in news articles, and I think I had a sense of the spin and the filter through which all of that goes. And I think it was about wanting to meet people in where they're living, and to try and get an understanding of that, of what that was like, and who they might be. I think that's where that yes came from. Yeah.
Great, please carry on. You were just starting and I interrupted you talking about your first visit.
It was completely overwhelming. It's overwhelming isn't really a strong enough word. I don't know if I have a strong enough word. It completely it didn't change my perspective on life and the world. I think it heavily reinforced my sense of injustices and the human beings at the core of it, and the sense of the size of huge, powerful institutional things that we are up against as tiny humans. And I wrote and wrote and wrote and wrote. I've got notebooks and notebooks. The only way I could process what I was seeing and what I was hearing was just to write and write and write and write. Not really revisited those notebooks. I keep saying I should get them out, but we just travelled all around the West Bank, and we met, you know, people in all walks of life, businessmen, students, greengrocers, builders. Like it was just every single aspect of life in Palestine, and we just listened to people, and it was horrifying. That it was both. It's that funny thing, and anyone who's spent time in Palestine, and I'm sure in other sort of active conflict zones, this funny juxtaposition of it being completely normal and everyone just be, you know, making, in particularly, I mean, like we call it occupation humor, but like the jokes you get are like amplified because it's so awful. So you know, there was joyfulness, and there was connection, and you know, with the other people. It was an international group, so with the other young people on the conference as well, and with the people that we met. But there was also just, I think for me, a completely overwhelming sense of of having to try and do whatever I could do to help, because it was so awful. I think that was the only way, aside from writing everything down so that I knew that I had something to, and I wrote articles for the Peace and Justice news that we had in Edinburgh at the time, to try and communicate some of the stuff that I'd seen. And when I left, I'd been writing at the time, I'd been writing the Universal Declaration of Human Rights to music. And so I had a copy of the Universal, this is how naive I was at the time. I had a copy of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights in my pocket when I came through the airport to come home at Tel Aviv, not thinking for any moment that that might be problematic for the Israeli authorities, because they're not a big fan of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, as I'm sure you're all aware. And they took it out of my pile of stuff and waved it in my face, like, "What's this?" And I was like, "It's the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. What's the problem?" You know. And they pulled me aside and they strip searched me just to try and intimidate me to not come back. It's a structural thing. And I sung Bambelela, which is a song that some of you will know. And it wasn't a conscious decision. It was a functional calming, sort of, calming your autonomic nervous system. And I think subconsciously as well, it will have been a sense of connection to singing with others in a physical space of resistance. So it was a sense of, I might be on my own standing here naked with an Israeli border official. However, if I wasn't singing it at them, I just found myself like singing Bambelila, Bambelila, Bambelila. And it's a South African song. Beautiful, beautiful song. And in fact, I'll find the link for you, Gabe, that if you Gabriel, who's doing the chat, if you put Bambelela and my name in, you'll probably find on my YouTube there's a video of the South African church community in Cape Town singing it that we managed to get during the pandemic, which is an amazing thing that people might want to see. And it calmed me, and at the time I felt a bit smug, because I thought, "You've already lost, mate. Like, I'm definitely coming back. Like, there's no way I'm not coming back." So it was, I had a sense of the arbitrariness of it. And we'd had a particular experience as a group in Hebron, Al Khalil, which is has a right-wing Israeli settler community living right in the city centre rather than surrounding, as it does in a lot of the West Bank, in Jerusalem, Hebron in particular. They're right close into the city centre, and the impact on the Palestinian community of Hebron is absolutely massive. They've, the main streets shut down. They just strut around with their automatic machine guns over their shoulders to complete and utter impunity. And they're the most radical of all radical right-wing Israeli settlers. I would say probably a majority of Israeli people would object to what they do and how they do it. I would, without having statistics. And we had some young, what I think they called themselves Arab Israelis at the time. I think they probably now call themselves Palestinian citizens of Israel. And the settlers came down and tried to intimidate and separate these people from the rest of us. And instinctively, those of us that were from other countries sort of circled round and tried to prevent them, intimidating, taking photos, pulling them aside. And they managed to get one of the Israeli soldiers to arrest, it's a sort of arbitrary word, arrest, but to take aside one of our conference members, and as I say, a Palestinian citizen of Israel. And the Christian Peacemaker team, which is the human rights observing force, there's three really in the West Bank. There's the Christian peacemaker team that I think they've just renamed themselves the peacemaker teams, because you don't have to be a Christian to be involved. It's just that's how it started. There's the EAPI, which is what I went on to do, the Ecumenical Accompaniment Service in Palestine and Israel. And there's ISM, the International Solidarity Movement, and they all operate slightly differently. The longer term systems are run by the Christian peacemaker teams and EAPI, and they have vests that set them apart, and they live for longer periods in places, and they operate on a sort of double sort of protective presence, in that at least if the soldiers and the settlers know someone's watching and there's cameras, and that hopefully that violent actions will be reduced simply by the presence of a third party, and also to try and de-escalate wherever possible when violence of whatever form does erupt against the Palestinian population. And one of the CPT people came and negotiated the release for what? For being, it was the managed to negotiate the release of this youngster. And I thought in that moment, I could do that. That's what I'll do. That is a thing that somebody in the West can, if you can volunteer some time and expertise, and take the time to learn and practice not making it worse, then that's the thing I could do. So I knew when I was in the airport on the way back out that was something I was going to look into when I got home, and I did. I went back about a year and a half later. I volunteered. I applied to join the EAPI volunteer force, and spent 3 months in a lovely village called Jayus in the north of the West Bank, doing things like checkpoint watch, getting up at 5 o'clock in the morning and walking down to the checkpoint, and just being there. They often wouldn't open the gates for the farmers to go through, so we would help the farmers phone the. I mean, it's really it's lots of little minutiae of things that you shouldn't have to do to help somebody just go to work. And the Israeli soldiers would sometimes open the gates so that the farmers could go and do their work, and sometimes they wouldn't. They were supposed to open them at the same time every day or whatever, and they had these signs saying, if it's not open when it should be, phone this number. But those signs were only in Hebrew and English. Brilliant. And often farmers wouldn't be in a position to, or wouldn't necessarily want to, or feel safe to phone up the Israeli army and say, actually, can you please open this gate and let me through to work? So often we'd ask, in liaison with the farmers, we would say, do you want us to phone and see if they can open it? And sometimes we would get the soldiers would come an hour or two later, and they'd open the gate and let the farmers through. And then just big time wasting nonsense. But if we hadn't been there, maybe they wouldn't have ever opened the gate that day, and they'd have lost that whole day's work. So that sort of stuff. But then also in Jayus at the time, there was a huge amount of incursions from the Israeli military on an almost daily basis for some of the time that they would just come in the middle of the night, just to hand anything from 3 or 4 to 20 soldiers, and go into people's homes and arrest often children. And usually children and young men, so from ages from about 12 to 22, 23. And we would put our clothes on and go outside and follow them around, trying to reason with them, to let people, why are you arresting this person? Oh, it's arbitrary. Or do you know that that's a 12-year-old child? Do you have brothers? Do you have sisters? What would your mum say? That sort of stuff that tries to, when you are able to be close enough to have personal interactions with the human beings that are a young conscript army, and that's what we're talking about with Israel. So it's different when they're further away with their bombs and their whatever. If you can't see the whites of someone's eyes, there's a lot less that you can do. But if you've got soldiers, even if they've got, as they all do, an automatic weapon, with them, you can still try and have a conversation with them. So we would, we would do whatever de-escalation we could, and then we would, when they didn't release the youngsters, we would take reports from the families. We would write eyewitness reports, and we would send those to the Red Crescent and the UN. And so the data that the United Nations and the International Red Cross, Red Crescent have about things like that comes from international observers, like I volunteered to do for a short time. And that was a lot, and we could spend way longer than the time that this this conversation is talking about my time there. And it you know, coming back to music, I took my guitar with me, a little guitar, and living in a village as I did, I would have it with me and play music with the kids in that way that you do. And that living in a place, getting to know, you know, being the stranger, trying to teach the kids particularly that strangers can be friendly and fun, and not just settlers or soldiers that want to harm you. That, you know, those seeds that you sow visiting Palestine as an international, I think, are really important, because a lot of kids in Palestine, in the West Bank, in the villages, grow up mostly seeing just soldiers and settlers. And that, it's gonna, if you grow up in that, you're gonna grow up thinking that everyone wants to hurt you, aren't you? You know, there's no way around that if there isn't any other visible exchange. And that's obviously going to harm the kids even further than the actual harm from the violence that happens to them. And so after I got back, a friend of mine, Susan, who had been to Palestine a couple of times herself, said, let's think about doing a choir tour to Palestine, which the seed of the idea had been from someone in Ramallah had said to her, oh, why don't you bring choir over here? And I wasn't sure in the first instance. And we talked about it. Who are we responding to? What's the point? Why are we doing it? Are we doing it for us? You know, who would it help? All of those conversations that you should have when you're doing any sort of action, particularly when it's going into where somebody lives, and it, you know, how you're going to impact their lives potentially. Even, you know, if we go somewhere, we're there for a week or 2 weeks and then we come away, you know, what are we leaving there? Have we escalated the situation accidentally by not being informed enough? Or, you know, all of those conversations. But we talked with Palestinian friends, we talked in Palestine and in Scotland, and felt like it was worth doing. And Process and Harmony is a big amorphous community, really. And rather than, we couldn't just have an open-ended massive tour group. What we needed was a group of people that a small movable sized group of people that had enough experience between us of different things as well as singing. And so we put together bit by bit a choir seeking out people, you know, that had the right spread of voice parts so that we could do a full 4-part gloriousness, but that also had other skills in non-violence and de-escalation and peace work, and sort of a spread of stuff. And not all of the people that we talked to felt able to come on the trip, and we ended up with, most of them did. We ended up with, I think we were 12 the first time. No, 11. Thank you, Margaret. And you know what? It was wonderful. It was, having been there in the what we experienced as the team in Jayus when we were there with the soldiers and everything. It felt utterly worthwhile, and I was completely shattered when I got back and emotionally exhausted by the whole thing. And it's really important, if you're trying to support people, who are experiencing something such as the occupation of Palestine, that we don't get so bogged down in it that we become traumatized and unhelpful because we're it's all too much and we're too emotional, because it's not about us, it's not about me. The time I spent in the West Bank in that role wasn't about me, it was about the people living there. And I believe that we did what we could in the exchanges that we had. It felt really useful, and it was a lot. And when we went back as a choir, we did a huge non-violence training series as well as the singing stuff. One of our Palestinian friends in Edinburgh wrote some Arabic lyrics for some stuff. We learned some Arabic songs. We took Scottish songs. We drew on the music of the anti-apartheid movement, the music of the civil rights and struggle in the US, so that we could carry this sense of other seemingly insurmountable oppressions have ended, structurally speaking, whilst there's still work to go in both of those places, that we could carry this sense of hope through the songs that we were singing. And it was, for me, I'm sure that wouldn't be the case necessarily for the other singers, but for me, it was such a joyful trip in many ways, because we were sharing, even on demonstrations, and the Friday demonstrations that happened in Palestine, we were there for 2 of them, and we had 2 really quite extreme experiences of those demonstrations. So I went to Nabi Saleh, which some of you will have heard of, is a village just outside of Ramallah that has had over the years like a hefty violent responses from the Israeli army. And so when we were asking around, where would be the useful place, where would some singing be useful at a demonstration, the answer came back Nabi Saleh, and we went to be part of that demonstration and to support it. And they asked us if we would lead the demonstration, because it upends what they're expecting. They were very stuck in this: we'll walk down to try and access the well, and then the Israeli army will shoot at us. We'll throw some rocks. The Israeli army will throw, spray the slurry water that they do with these water cannons that sort of like smells like chicken shit. And then the Palestinians will ultimately have to run back to the village. Some people will be hurt, some people might be killed, Palestinians. And and they were stuck in that. So they asked us if we'd lead the singing, which we lead the demonstration with singing, which did 2 things. One of them was that it was a bunch of white people singing. So like, to some extent, the Israeli army were like, what's happening here today? It gave that moment of a question mark. And also, I'm significantly younger than most of the choir, so we were a mostly middle-aged white Scottish choir, and that gives that second question mark, doesn't it? It's like, why are these people here? What are they doing? And so it delayed the onset of that violent response from the Israeli army by about 45 minutes to an hour. But then that response did come, the stock violent response did come, and so so that was one of there's a bigger story around that, but it felt like we were able in that moment to upend the norm, that hopefully we sowed a question mark or 2 in the brains of the Israeli soldiers that have just been told to shoot at or tear gas the Palestinian population. And hopefully the Palestinian population of that village felt like in that moment they weren't alone, that there were other people witnessing and seeing and being part of their straightforward requests for access to their well or access to their farmland, or whatever the just cause is of the demonstration. And then the next Friday, that was one where we weren't able to see the whites of the eyes of the soldiers, which is always much more difficult if what you're trying to do is engage in non-violent struggle and engage of de-escalation of any sort. That you can't talk to a water cannon firing chicken slurry at you. You have to run away from it. But then the next week we went to a village called Almasra again, because we'd asked people around where would be the most useful place for us to go, and we went to Almasra, and we were part of a less physically violent, much closer in demonstration. So again, the community was gathering to go visit their well that they weren't allowed access to, because the people had Israeli settlements had been built in the area and stopped them from accessing it, supported by the Israeli government and the Israeli army. And so they were stuck in the same back and forth that the village of Nabi Saleh were in, but they weren't getting the same size of physical violence. And so what they had was a lot of Israeli soldiers, but closer in. They weren't standing behind their vehicles, and they weren't shooting first, even if they were shooting later. And so we were able to be, see the whites of the eyes of the soldiers, and to see our friend Mahmoud, who's become a very good friend, many of us, who's a non-violent direct action organizer in the community of the Popular Resistance. And he, we all remember this. The whole choir remembers this. He was like this close to an Israeli soldier, and he said, our lands are occupied, but your minds are occupied as well. And he goes through this, and he does this every week with different soldiers. This sense of meeting, even though the soldiers are all carrying automatic weapons and could gun down the whole village, and have been throwing tear gas and have been shooting, even though not as much as Nabi Saleh, and have been ... that he's still able to find the humanity and resilience within himself to meet a young Israeli in that environment and challenge them, and to say, to try and speak to their humanity was one of the most, again, inspiring isn't quite a strong enough word. It's for want of a better word, one of the most inspiring things I've ever witnessed, I think. And so, whilst there were interactions involving violence that perhaps we had done a lot of preparation for, but I was hoping we wouldn't actually experience, and we did as a choir, there was a real uplift. And Mahmoud, our singing for Mahmoud gave him the most incredible lift. The other thing I remember from that day was just how totally bowled over by us singing like this South African Hurriya Jai, this freedom is coming, in Arabic and English. And he was just like, yeah, sing it again. He couldn't believe the strength and power and something that came from us just being with them and singing, and you think, oh, what was the point in just going to Palestine and singing? Like, a lot. And that was the demonstrations. And we went to refugee camps and sung with kids, and we went to village communities, and and it wasn't all right at the nub experiences, but all of those exchanges, because we had the music, they carried something extra with them that helped to buoy people up in Palestine, that I can't quite describe. I'd be hard pushed to explain what it did, but it did something, Thank
you so much, Penny. And so you wrote to me, well, actually to me and Emily in 2015, March 2015, and you said Chris Booth had suggested this column. And your first column was published in October-November issue 2015. And in it, you said, I want to tackle this question of why radical music. And I think what you've just said summed up so beautifully a lot of what you said in that article about the power of music for, given for social justice. So if it's okay, we'll turn for a little bit to PN columnist, Peace News columnist, Penny Stone. And So I am really honored as an editor to have been the conduit, the channel for these columns, which now make a fantastic treasure trove of stories and songs and insights and experiences from all over the world. So it is a very great pleasure to me that Peace News has been able to give a platform for this, that I've been able to help with that. And the funny thing is that in these nearly 10 years since you first wrote that email, we have been physically in the same place, but we didn't have a conversation until last month in Edinburgh, which I don't know how I'd managed to arrange things in that way. But I just want to give an opportunity for you to just reflect on your time so far of writing the column, and what it's meant to you, and what you've hoped to do with it, what you think you've done with it.
My impetus, I'd forgotten that Chris had suggested I write to you. That's lovely. My impetus for doing it, I think he'd been saying it for a while, was that a peace activist based in Edinburgh, Geoffrey Carnell, who those of us based in Edinburgh, most of us will have known. He died. He'd been very involved at a ripe old age. He'd been very involved in peace activism from at least from his teenage years, as far as I know. But he was one of the trustee board at the Peace and Justice Centre when I was working there a lot. And he had one of the stories that he would tell would be his memories of riding around Cambridge during World War II, giving people copies of the Peace News, which always just, it's such a vivid image if you think about how that is likely to have been received at that time. A lot of people will have been pretty unhappy with that, and I always found that amazing. And he spent the rest of his life, he always got a stack of 10 Peace Newses and he would distribute them. And it was just one of those tiny things that he did for his whole life. It was part of his commitment. And so when he died, I felt like, oh, I could buy 10 and distribute them. But because Chris had suggested a radical music column might be useful, I thought, oh, actually what I could do is I could offer to write this column, and that could be part of my giving back, carrying it on sort of thing. So that was where the impetus came. And I thought at the time, this will go for a year or two and then I'll run out of things to say, because, to some degree, we do the same thing over and over again. And actually, we don't at all. We do and we don't. If you're involved in any sort of activism, there's an inevitability of doing some of the same stuff round and again, because it works for you, or because it works for your community, or because it feels like it reaches people in a particular way. But hopefully we keep revisiting the whys and the hows and the could we do this differently, or is this context different, or could this be tweaked, or do we need to do something completely different this time, or who is this actually? These questions that we can't navel gaze the whole time. We have to get out and do stuff, but there has to be a reflective process as part of how and why we do it, and who we're trying to reach, and who, what's your point, which is my composing system. No, I don't have it up in here. I used to have a sign up above my piano that says, what's your point? And I would let myself, write music for up to about an hour just for the joy of it. And then I'd have to hit the what's your point filter. And so, is this worth writing because a group of people can sing it, because it communicates a story that I think's worth telling, or ... Or actually, do I just need to keep singing this to process my emotional feelings? Fine, on you go. Like it's not it doesn't have to be about communicating something to someone else, but there comes a what's your point gate. And I have that with activism as well, that I'm willing to do things up to a certain point, but I have, there has to be a why are we doing this, and is it working in whatever way it needs to be working, even if it's just for us to know that we've said, no, this is completely unacceptable. So writing the column has given me sort of a habitual space for reflection, even though I come to it a couple of days before I know the deadline is coming every other month, as well you know. And sometimes they're about telling the stories of, you know, they're not all by any chalk about my experiences of radical singing, although a lot of them are, with different groups and in different environments. Because they also tell the stories of songs and musicians doing things around the world in different ways. That it's given me cause for reflection. That's, I think, been really helpful. And once I'd passed the 2-year mark, I thought, oh yeah, I'm never going to run out of things to write about now, because there's infinite perspective. There's infinite ways to look at the hows and whys, even aside from there's the whole world of you know, people using music in different ways to challenge the status quo. And so I've really enjoyed doing it, because you know, aside from the fact that I like sharing the stories, and it, you know, it feels in some sense useful to communicate with other people purely for myself, it's been a really helpful mechanism of reflection, which is something that I, as I'm sure lots of you, just simply don't make time for. And I've really loved writing them. I would probably keep writing them indefinitely. And you're a brilliant editor. That's the other thing. You know, if you write an article, and it's 750 words, give or take, which I've got better at. When I started off, they were all 1,100, and then I would get them down to about 900, and then send it to Mill to deal with the rest. But then there was a sweet spot for a few years. It was always 750. And then it's crept up over the last couple of years. I think there's just so much happening in the world. And there's so, you know, you want to write about, you know, an Iranian rapper but you want to make the link with a Ukrainian song, and you want to make a link with a Palestinian song, you know, and you sort of, it becomes more about wanting to make the links between different people. You don't just want to tell one story, because it's never just one story. It's about the links and the resonances that, you know, it becomes harder to just write 750 words. But it's a great exercise, and I would recommend anyone, whatever it is you do, whether it's to do with music or activism, or, you know, whatever it is you do in your life, like the exercise of sitting down and writing something that's about 750 words. It's a great length to have to simmer down your thoughts and reflections to something. It's just a good size. I would recommend it.
Gabriel used to say a thing. He sometimes would write an email and at the end of it say, "I'm sorry, I don't have time to write something shorter."
Spot on.
Terrific. So we're going to transition now to questions from folks. So if you get ready to raise your hand either online, well, preferably with the participants list, but we will scroll through the pictures in case there are folk who want to raise their hands online. I should say, in terms of Peace News stuff, that we are producing badges, Stop Arming Israel, Ceasefire Now, Stop Starving Gaza. I guess Gabriel will stick the links into the chat. So we are selling these on marches for a donation, and on the web shop we have to sell them for a set amount. And after deducting the cost of making the badge, the proceeds are going to medical aid to Palestinians, and so far we've raised over £13,000 for MAP. And the other Peace News thing I want to mention is that on the 7th, in 4 days' time, I am doing a talk about Noam Chomsky's propaganda model of the mainstream media. And so you're very welcome to come back if you'd like to learn something about that. So with that, I'm going to see if anyone wants to raise their hand to be called on to ask Penny a question. It may be a question to which you already know the answer, but you just want to hear her say it. So I guess I'll scroll through the pictures to see if someone's raising their hands on the screen. It looks like you've answered all the questions, Penny, all the questions in the world. So
I did go on quite a ramble in the middle there.
it was terrific. It was terrific. It was like I love what you have to say, either in writing or in person. You have floored them.
It'd be harder to edit my my spoken word, I reckon, Mill. I think you've got the better deal there. Oh, Margaret's pointing at someone. But who are you pointing at?
Yeah, this is not really a nomination system. It's it's
Gabriel.
Oh, Gabriel has got his hand up. Oh, I see. That's
Thank you, Margaret.
Yeah, I guess my question is, maybe it's just from ignorance, but from my experience of going to activist events, there are a small number of people who engage in singing, but we don't. It's not more widespread. And I see so many contexts where I go where there is like dreary chanting, and you just think, if we were singing together, this would be so much more powerful and awesome event. Do you think there are? I mean, obviously, yeah. What ways do you think we can encourage and enable people who may not feel comfortable singing normally to get, but who are activists and stuff, to step into that space and feel that power that I think is latent there?
I hear that, Gabe. I think that's why lots of us started radical choirs, is because the experience sometimes of being at shouty demos as a singer makes you think, oh, we could definitely do this messaging better. And that as a mechanism, it has the capacity to potentially make somebody who's passing, whether it's a visual or a demo, like prick up their ears and listen, rather than go like shut them down because it feels a bit much. And over the years, I've had to accept, and I think it's important actually, that for some people, like, they need the shouting, and it doesn't make me feel any better. I hate shouty demos. And I will sometimes go to a demo if I know it's going to be shouty, if I feel like it's so important to be there for whatever reason. And particularly with some of the Palestine stuff and some of the anti-fascist stuff over the years, like, they tend to be the shoutier ones. But I know, but some people get what they need from that shouting. Now, I would argue, as I think some of the other people on this call would, that they could get that from the singing if they took a sideways step, because physiologically part of what they're getting from that is like a huge expulsion of air, like a complete physical which you get from singing like a big long note. Anyway, that's probably an aside. But part of the answer to your question, I think, is super simple stuff that can be sung, like, that's halfway between a chant and a song. So there's always going to be singers and choirs that can do something that's slightly more complex. But for example, one of the songs that we sing at our weekly singing Gaza vigil in Edinburgh is Ceasefire Now, to the tune of We Will Rock You. And it's a huge tourist city, and if we have, for example, like a big group of school kids or people walking past, I'll make sure the next song is this, because it's completely join-inable, is like a stamp, stamp, clap, stamp, stamp, clap. Ceasefire, ceasefire, ceasefire now, ceasefire now. And it gives two things. It's slightly familiar. People who don't want to sing can join in with the stamp and clap and still feel part of it. And even people who don't think they can sing find themselves mumbling along. Like, it's so simple and so satisfying. We stack that up in 3-part harmony just because why not? But something that simple, you can get thousands of people doing at the same time. It's just that we culturally we don't. I've wasted way longer than I should have dreaming of being part of either the US civil rights struggle at the period in which, like, it was led by Black church singing, or the South African struggle when there were thousands of people singing and dancing, marching but dancing, because it's culturally it just exists culturally in a different space for them all. So I think to some extent, we're never going to have that we see and our hearts lift towards, those of us that are singers or those of us that love that music, whether we consider ourselves singers or not. But I think we can use it. I lean more towards football. A whole stadium can sing "You'll Never Walk Alone," can sing "Sunshine on Leith," and it really works. And they really do it. And I don't think I think that's one of our cultural threads that we could pick at more. And just for any singers that sing with me, we're not going to start singing "Sunshine on Leith" or "You'll Never Walk Alone." Don't get excited. But there's something about trying to find the bit that is familiar enough for people, for them to connect with, which is what "We Will Rock You" does, because it's it doesn't really matter. In Edinburgh, at the moment we've got tourists from all over the world. So if we want to get people to join in, what we need is something that connects with people from loads of different cultural backgrounds, of which there aren't that many. And that's, looking at what the common middle ground is. If you look at the the anti-nuclear protesters in the 1960s in Scotland, you would be singing from a very sort of Scottish folk centric, there'd be a whole load of songs that everyone grew up singing in school. And we're now beautifully such an internationalist society, depending where we live, and we're so globalized because of the media that we can digest online, that there aren't the same set of everyone knows this songs, and it's actually become harder for us to find those songs that are a middle point. And I think therefore actually finding something that's like super simple, that's halfway towards a chant, but that is actually sung. I've reclaimed quite a few chants that I've heard shouted in the streets and made them sung. Like people will shout, "Say it loud and say it clear, refugees are welcome here." Like that's so much better sung. "Say it loud and say it clear, refugees are welcome here." Like it's obvious with that, but there are chants that we can make more tuneful. So I think there's a bridging bit there, isn't there? Yeah.
Terrific. I'm so glad I was here to hear that answer. That is wonderful. As we're heading towards closing, there is something I wanted to ask you about, which is in that first column that you wrote, you said there are 4 kinds of radical music, and indoor, outdoor, I think one was storytelling, and the last one was about, I guess now we'd call it self-care. Maybe you did call it self-care then, but like helping us to stave off burnout, helping us to nurture ourselves and help us to keep going. And when we met in Edinburgh last month, in our conversation, you were putting quite a lot of emphasis on that, the importance of that within social change work. And I just wondered if you wanted to say something about music and that, and just in general about that, the need for that side of social change work, of sustaining yourself, as you were kind of saying in relation to Palestine.
Yeah, that's interesting that I identified that early on. It's felt particularly important since October. And I think to some degree it's felt particularly important as the climate crisis has become more and more evident over the last few years. That one of the things that singing can do for us, and other things can do this too, is to help us feel connected to other human beings without having to sit down and have a conversation. And I think that's really important, because it's like it's pre or post verbal, isn't it? the response to the size of the atrocities that we're seeing in Gaza, or the size of the climate crisis. Like what can we say? And yet lots of us have an impetus to try, and so when we come together, having something that we can do that gives us space to acknowledge the size of things and or the pain of things, or or the joy of things. Like it's not just about, to some degree, having space to grieve together. So that it gives us somewhere to put, not to put those feelings down, but to feel like, yeah, I mean, to put them down temporarily, perhaps, but to feel connected with other people, that there then opens up a little bit of space, whether it's to have a conversation, or whether it's to look at what action could be done, or whether it's to say, I'll try tomorrow. Actually, this was enough for me today, and maybe tomorrow or maybe next week I can try and do something. And it's not, it's a team sport, isn't it? There's a huge instance of burnout amongst activists and amongst socially minded and empathetic humans, because it's overwhelming, and we can only make positive change in the world together. And looking at that, I think looking at the big stuff and looking at the small stuff together, sort of in a brain sort of way, is one of the ways to approach that. That I, in this moment, don't feel like we can stop the wheels of the Israeli war machine. I still think it's worth, in this moment, I still think it's worth pressuring groups and organizations to divest. I still think it's worth protesting and all the rest of it. But one of the things that we can do is be visible and connect with those Palestinians that live amongst us, or that, because of the media that we have, that can see that we are still standing up after all this time, saying it's still not okay. We still don't accept it. You still have to stop. I don't care how long you've been doing it. I don't care how many people you've already killed. It's still time to stop. Like we're not going to accept it just because. And so doing that, but having the singing as a balm, to some degree. The first two songs I wrote after the 7th of October, and I've written a lot of songs about Palestine before October the 7th, the first two songs that I wrote, one of them was influenced by the protest outside of the White House just a few days after, led by Jewish Americans, who shut down all 11 entrances to the White House, saying "not in our name" and like "stop it right now." And one of them was singing. I couldn't sleep, as I'm sure many people couldn't sleep, and luckily my partner was away, so I could just sort of ebb in and out of, I don't know, just living in reading the news, trying to, what can we do? And I got to sleep that night with the live stream on Facebook from this demonstration outside of the White House, and it was because they were singing like a soothing ceasefire now. It was soothing. It was like a lullaby, and they were doing it to soothe themselves. They were being clear about their messaging. They were, direct actioning, shutting down the White House, but they knew that the music that they needed was something that would help to make them feel grounded, connected, relaxed to some degree, which is sort of an odd way to think about it. And it helped me to sleep. And so then the song I wrote for Protest and Harmony to sing on our vigils that started shortly after that, the informing thought was, we all need to be soothed. Like, we can still be clear in our messaging, which is why I wrote the James Baldwin, "The Children Are Always Ours," but the rest of it, every single one, but the rest of it is just ceasefire now, ceasefire forever. Oh no, sorry, that's the other one. Is there's a lot of ceasefire songs at the moment. Is "The children are always ours, every single one, everyone. Not in my name, not in my name. Not in my name, not in my name, ceasefire now. You know, so it's got that sort of, it's soothing and it gives us space to cry. And it does. We still take it in turns to cry. This many months in, we still, as singers, take it in turns to cry on the vigils. And it makes people passing us cry because it gives them a moment to go, oh God, you know, you're all feeling this too. It doesn't fix it, and it doesn't, you know, it doesn't stop the engines moving of the Israeli war machine, and it can only be one part of what we're doing at different times. But I think it's really it helps us to keep going. If I didn't have those vigils, I started them because I needed them, and I needed a singing, reflective. Like I needed a grief space, and I think lots of other people did too. I often do, oh, what do people need? What do people need? Oh, let's try this. That wasn't that. It was a rare moment when I was just like, and I remember putting an email out in October saying, I'm going to be here. If anyone wants to come, that's where I'll be. You know, it was very much, I'll, you know, and there might be singing. And of course, lots of people came because they all needed the same thing. And we did sing, and it's become a really, increasingly it's become a communicating to other people's space. But in the first instance, for the first couple of months, it was more about standing outside of the UK government representative in Edinburgh and saying, not in our name, but also about grieving together and feeling like there was somewhere to put the size of what we were all feeling every week. Yeah, not to be underestimated, the potential for singing to help us process stuff collectively, because you can process individually whilst being in the collective space. It's not that common that something can enable you to do that. You know, like we're all feeling our own feelings. We've all got our own baggage. We've all got our own connections. I don't know what anyone's family histories are. I don't know what anyone's, you know, connections with, I know what some people's connections with Palestine are, but, you know, we've all got different stuff, and we're all able to be there in ourselves, but held and connected with the other people around us. And I think that's such an important part of how we try to make the change, because we want to build the world we want, right? Like I want a world with singing, for one. And I also want a world in which people can come and be as they are, that can come and be come with difficult feelings and still be part of the group. And I think singing has the potential to do that, you know, and not have to sing. You know, speaking to Gabe's thing, like question, you don't always have to be singing. You can still be part of the singing space. And with, you know, when things that make us cry, it's more obvious. So I just need to listen to this, and then I'll come back when I'm ready. I'm just gonna have a bit of a cry. So it's valuable.
Okay, so the last thing I'm going to say really is I encourage folk who haven't seen Penny's columns to seek them out online. If you want to read them on paper, you know, the latest issue is coming out right now. And just in relation to what's going on, I have written an article in this latest issue about the last ceasefire deal, saying Israel won't take yes for an answer, and I'll be doing a little bit of an update about what's happened with this latest ceasefire deal, and how Netanyahu has been sabotaging the deals as they're being trying to appear. So Penny, I'm gonna give the last word to you if there's anything you want to say to folk, and then after that we will close and say good night to folks. So over to you for a last word. I'm just really honored to have had a role in bringing words to the world, Penny, and I am so grateful to have had this chance to share this Zoom space, and to be able to share the video of this with people, because I'm a great admirer of you. So over to you for the last word.
Thanks, Mel. I think my last word would be there is a campaign choirs network for anyone that would like to get singing in the streets. There's Protest and Harmony in Edinburgh, but there are quite increasingly choirs all over the UK. For anyone that's in the UK, there's so that's the Campaign Choirs Network. There's a website you can just email and say what's happening near me, or have a look. If you're in America, the People's Music Network has not as many choirs, but some, and radical singing happening. So there's stuff happening, and I wouldn't, you don't have to, if you have care for like social justice and environmental justice stuff, but it feels like too much to commit to doing something that's, oh, if I sing with this group, I have to then go out in the streets. There's loads of choirs that have a shared sense of that social justice, and not just choirs, singing groups. So like you sort of think of as a choir as like a performing thing, but what I tend to run, and lots of other people do, is like a singing group. So it's about being in the space and singing in the moment more than it is necessarily making something to share in an audience performer dynamic. The US network is the People's Music Network. It was partly founded by Pete Seeger, and it's still going strong. And yeah, so if you just want to sing, if you think, oh, maybe singing would help me, you don't have to join a street choir. That might be something you want to do in due course, but you just, find a group to sing. I teach with the Natural Voice Network, and there are people all over the UK and the world running natural voice groups. And it's the ethos I was talking about, which is about freeing people's, giving people space to use their voices, and helping make safe spaces for that, and to find luscious harmony. So you can look up the Natural Voice Network if you want to dip your toe into singing. And I think I'd just say everyone's voice matters. And it might not be singing that helps you to find that space. It might be something else that helps you feel like you can join with other people and add your voice to it. But your voice matters. So seek out people that you can share that with, because they'll be somewhere, even if it's not singing. And that's how we're gonna make the world better, is by finding each other and joining our voices in whatever way we can in the context that we're living, I think.